Hello, and welcome to today's Trainer Education webinar, The Matrix Manager, How to Lead in a Collaborative Environment, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Jim Eicher. Today's webinar will last approximately an hour. Before we begin, note there is a question chat box located possibly in your upper right-hand corner of your screen. You can use this during the webinar to submit any questions you have, and then we'll either answer your questions as we receive them during our Q&A session at the end or by email after the session. My name is Sarah Montgomery, and I will moderate today's webinar. I am in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. Today's presenter is Jim Eicher, a respected author, consultant, and subject matter expert in the fields of sales, organizational strategy, leadership, and communication. Jim's professional career includes leadership roles at Booz Allen Hamilton, Andersen Worldwide, and Symantec, and he is currently manager of organizational effectiveness for a large technology firm. Jim is also the author of the highly acclaimed book on management communication, Making the Message Clear, as well as several assessment tools, including the Leader Manager Profile, Neurolinguistic Communication Profile, and the Matrix Manager Inventory. Welcome, Jim.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you all of you for tuning in for today, and good morning and good afternoon to you. A number of you may have some collaboration initiatives going on in your companies, your organizations. I know that's a kind of a hot topic. It was the cover of Harvard Business Review a couple of months ago. And one of the things that enables the collaboration process at a company to be effective is effective matrix management. And we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about that and how it can enable your collaboration initiatives. And one of the things we'll also discuss here is that matrix management has been around for quite a while, but the world around us has changed quite a bit. So we're going to also talk about how that's changed and how it impacts what you need to do. Now, the first thing we're going to do on the next slide is actually introduce you to a quick poll or quiz to kind of get an idea. That is, are you a matrix manager yourself? In other words, there's a number of behaviors that indicate that you're, if not officially a matrix manager, that is, it's not your designated title, that you probably have to engage in a lot of activities that require that you have the matrix manager competencies, especially if you're leading any kind of global or cross-functional initiatives or interdepartmental team initiatives. So with that, Sarah is going to launch a poll here for you, and we'll start on the poll about matrix management, and I'll talk you through that a bit here. So, you know, you may go down here on the 10 questions, and you'll see a number of different things. I'll kind of excuse me for talking over a little bit while you do this. But you know, in terms of people in multiple locations and time zones, you know, a lot of us were for a while, you know, doing something or seeing somebody in a different location was going down the hall to a different cube, and of course that's changed. And of course, this technology is really exploded in terms of how you need to communicate to people, Skype, not just your email anymore, instant messenger, but some of you may have a technology called telepresence. And dealing with not just employees, but having to manage contractors, consultants, even in a role of vendor management and outsource management as well. And then there's the whole idea of, you know, when a project is complete, that it may be temporary. And you may move on to something else. So all of these indicate a very changed environment, and that the requirements these days are very, very different here. So it looks like we've got pretty good indication here. Let's take a look at what some of your responses were. Okay, so wow, this is good. So it's pretty evident. You can see the answers here. So in terms of answering 1 to 3, you had 17. So you had another third of you on 4 to 6, and actually pretty much the majority, at least half of you, 7 to 10. So the thing is, if you answered 6 or more of these questions, looking at the next slide here, then you are definitely in the right place. So and a number of you also answered 4 to 6 yes as well. So that indicates that you're on the cusp here. So this is, I just want to say you're in the right place, and we're going to spend some time going over what these are. So if you've answered yes, as most of you did here, we're looking on slide 6. One of the things you might want to ask yourself is, well, how does this show up on at my company? So let's go over these on slide 6 then. All right, so this might be some of your dilemmas that impact and require you to deal with the behaviors that were indicated on the quiz. First of all, there's geographic dispersion. It's not even a different city, it's a different continent, different time zone, different country. You've got remote locations all over the globe, different cultures that you have to deal with, issues around cultural integration and the way decisions are made, not just in different country cultures, but also corporate cultures as well. You may work with people for years that you have no face-to-face contact with. You've got to figure out how is that going to work. And then, of course, there's just a whole, with matrix management, there's a whole dual reporting structure as well. So you have one boss that finds your paycheck, but you have another boss on a project in which you're responsible for some deliverable, some set of milestones and activities that you're on the line for. And getting to that last bullet, we kind of get into, well, you're in that I'm accountable, but I'm not directly responsible. So my authority is kind of different, but then I'm held that I need to have something done by a particular time. So what's a manager to do in this place? And as I said, with the new assessment that we have out, we're really excited that we can answer a lot of those questions for you. So moving on to slide 7, what I'm going to quickly do is go over the agenda for today. So first we'll go over the webinar outcomes, behind the 8 ball, and what I mean by that is really what's driving all of these changes and all the different challenges that you're experiencing. The other thing is sort of a so what or who cares. In other words, if I get better in this area, if I understand it, what's it going to get me, what's it going to get my organization, that sort of thing. Now behind this, of course, is a model, 2 sets of competencies. We're going to go over those competencies in some detail, and we're going to talk about how to balance them out, because balancing those competencies is really the key to being an effective matrix manager and making your collaboration initiatives work well. I've got also, in addition to this poll here, we've got an application exercise around building networks, because networks and links are very, very critical in business in general now, but in matrix management collaboration specifically. And those of you, particularly those of you in Gen Y generation or work with Gen Y, everything that we do, Facebook, Twitter, all that kinds of stuff, it's all around networks and how to build them, and social networks, work networks, all that kind of thing. So we'll spend some time on that. We'll also look at how decisions are made in a hierarchical versus a network environment and how that impacts you. We'll look at balance. And then what you get to is when you get to a point that we'll summarize is that when you understand what the competencies are to be an effective matrix manager, there's a set of activities that either you or people in your organization need to be able to do in order to be effective in the widest sense of the word. We're gonna go over those as well. Got a little bit of action planning, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So if we move on here to slide 8, what we've got here is quickly, what are the outcomes for today? Well, as I mentioned, we've got a model with 2 sets of competencies. We're going to look at and talk about balancing those competencies. We're going to look at the different decision-making criteria that individuals and organizations make in a collaborative and matrix environment, and what you can do to be most effective there. And then we're going to actually define and give you an activity and a tool to define your role set or network that you have to work in order to work in a matrix environment. So let's going on here to slide 8. What we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves, say, hey, what is where I have behind the 8 ball? What is driving this? So if Sarah, you could move to slide 9. I'm stayed there. There are several things that are really driving this in a very systemic sense. All companies and organizations, and some of these are familiar to you, but again, they've changed and have a slightly different spin also. So the first one is workforce globalization, and that's been around for a while, and that's been changing. You know, we first kind of looked at it as the outsourcing activities that went on, but it's really expanded its depth and scope. Workforce globalization is just really not about jobs now. It's about how we all interact with business and social things around us. So we may interact and have relationships with people globally we haven't met through different technology. It has to do with our suppliers. Where does stuff come from? It's not just where the jobs are. Where does stuff come from? Where does your stuff come from? It has to do with how you purchase things. And so this whole phenomenon, and it is truly expanding to all continents and all cultures and all peoples, is one of the main drivers here. Another one is what I call customer insistence. And this includes you as well if you think about how you behave as a customer. You know, we used to call about customer satisfaction, and we talked about customer delight, but really customers are insistent. You want it, and you want it now, and you want it perfect, and there's no excuse, and it's the price you want, and that is the pressure that you put on people when you purchase. That is the pressure that is put on you in your organization, your corporation, and it's constant. It's 24/7, and it does not let up. And the other one, too, is we've talked a lot about technology change over the last 10 or 15 years, but change implies that you kind of know where you are and you know where you want to go. You know what the goal is and you know how to get there. Well, now we're in a stage of what I call technology fluctuation. In other words, change happens so fast and it's so unexpected, even to the people that really understand the technologies and the industries, that you're really not sure of the outcomes. So, you know, a few years ago you had MySpace, and now it's My What? And this year it's Facebook, but, you know, honestly, what it's going to be in a couple of years, you don't know. And there's a lot of collateral outcomes in technology changes. So you've got your smartphone, but your smartphone now probably has a GPS application. So, you know, if you own a GPS company or have a GPS, you know, those may not be around in a while. The same thing with cameras. Most people are starting to use their phones now to take pictures, so that puts pressures on companies. So there's all these different changes that are going on. And so the things that you feel and the things that you experience are real, they are happening, and they're out there. So with that in mind, let's go on to slide 10. And so I kind of talked about what are the drivers for this, and now the next thing is how does this show up for your, not just for you, because we already talked about how it shows up for you for that. How does this show up in your organization and therefore cascade and put the pressure on you as you go along here? Well, first thing you're going to see is you're going to see pressure on margins. You're going to see a lot of financial pressures. These first two kind of bullets here have to do with that. So it's going to be tougher to make money. And then on the other, so the bottom line. And then on the next one, it's going to be tougher on the top line. You have revenue targets. It's going to be more difficult to deal with them because maybe there's been some change in your industry. It's unexpected, and it's impacted the amount of money that you take. The other thing, too, is the constant. There's just even with the recession and even with some challenges globally in terms of jobs, turnover is higher than normal in a lot of places, and this will be a pressure, too. I've even seen this in companies that are, whether they're doing well or not doing well, or the industry's doing well or not doing well, that maybe you don't have any turnover in the state that you live in, but in some other country where your company does business, the turnover is very, very high. So this dynamic is no longer local, it's a global dynamic, and these are just a few of the things that show up in your company that indicate that you've got this kind of change going on where you're going to need to manage in a matrix environment, globally, cross-functionally, and focus on teamwork and collaboration. So as we move to slide 11, it's sort of the so what or who cares. And this I look at from a couple of perspectives. And really what we want, what this one's about is what we're going to focus on today and what this really does for you, because that's why you're here. You're here to get something for yourself that will enable you to be more effective and also your organization as well. So on the individual side, what we're going to talk about here is these model and competencies will help you improve managing global disparate group of individuals. Especially the key thing here is that you have no direct control over. That's one of the tricks in this environment. We're going to talk about influence and collaboration, which goes down to the next bullet. And so we will deal with that at an individual level. What does that look like? How can it be effective when you don't have direct command and control over people? So as I said, influence and persuasion. The key thing here is that you have mutually beneficial goals or outcomes and that you're aligned on those, that you're able to create a connectedness, especially with people you've never met. We have a lot of cultures around the world globally, and when people move here from other places, they tend to import their culture with them. And a lot of those cultures are relationship-based as opposed to process or task-based cultures. So you've got to get a sense of relationship connectedness with people, and we have a tool, an activity that we'll do to go over that. And the other big thing here is balancing that individual independence and the collaboration. How do you make that work? So on an organizational level, we've got, these terms have come up. We've got matrix teams, virtual teams, global teams. How do you improve performance there? Most of us now work in flatter, leaner, less hierarchical organizations. Again, there's some cultural differences there that we'll talk about. I don't just mean country culture, corporate as well. So if you are forced to, in a matrix environment, looking at kind of network point-to-point kind of activity, how do you deal and contrast with organizations that's more hierarchical? And then that leads directly to the cross-functional problem solving and conflict resolution, because by definition, that's what you'll be, the environment you'll be working in. And of course, clear roles and mission and objectives always enable effective performance in those areas. So with that in mind, what we're going to do now is jump into the content. So we're on the next slide. Thank you. And so this model has two components. And the first set of competencies around this are command and control, which a lot of you, this is a phrase that's been around for years. You probably use it yourself, and it's one of the reasons we, in this model, we've used in the research, it tended to use phrases and aspects of the model that people are familiar and comfortable with. So what does this look like? So on the command and control side, there's four things. There's knowledge of content, correctness of information, consistency of image, and evidence of regulation. So really the knowledge of content is someone manages in a command and control environment by what they know. The assumption there is they know more than somebody else, and that expertise or that knowledge is what drives a piece of that. The second one, the correctness of information, is that what also does that is that there's an assumption, again, that the person is right, that the information that you get, the knowledge of the content that you get is, in fact, factually correct. And that will be the second piece there. The other piece is also a consistency of image, this idea of image. It's called face in some cultures. But the reality is every individual has a sense of, particularly in an organization, of how they want to be viewed, what their sort of personal politics are, not their social politics, but their personal politics of what perception do I want people to have of me. And that's very, very critical. That's why in a command and control environment, criticizing the boss is difficult, because that goes counter to the perception of I am correct and I know more. So that builds on it as well. And this idea of evidence of regulation has to do with the fact that in a command and control environment, one of the demands of people that work in an environment is they keep tabs on or regulate those that are around them and underneath them. So that's what that refers to there. So that's one half of the model. If we go to slide 13, what we see is the other half of the matrix management model. So, and these are roughly in contrast. We'll see how these compare up. These are roughly in contrast to the command and control competency. So now you've got empowerment so that workers can know better. So it's not about what I know, it's about getting other people that I depend on. I empower them so they can get stuff done. I assume that they know what they're doing. The next thing is taking risks. We work in an environment of ambiguity and uncertainty, particularly if you're in a matrix environment, and you've got to have a capacity for risk-taking there. So, of course, risk-taking is going to assume that you're not always going to be correct, that you're going to make a mistake at some point. The next thing, too, is that rather than be concerned about how others perceive you, it's that you get others involved and included in the participation. And you're not really concerned about what do the people look like. You know, the image part isn't important. We've got to get a job done here. So you create environments of participation, and that can take all kinds of forms. And finally here, instead of keeping tabs on people and restricting them, what you're doing is you're developing their skills and abilities so they can be effective in their role. So with that in mind, let's look at slide 14. And this is just really kind of a visual on 14 to show that how these are paired, because both in the assessment in the model and in terms of how you make this work, what you're doing is you're trying to balance knowledge, empowerment, correctness, and risk-taking, image and participation, and regulation, or keeping tabs on people with developing them. So this will mirror the assessment, but this is where these two things will, as we'll see later, there can be some tension as you're trying to learn one way of doing things and let go of another way of doing things. So we're going to take on the next slide, slide 15, a slightly different point of view. What we've talked about so far is we've talked about you from an individual point of view. So now we're going to step back a little bit and say, okay, organizationally, what does this look like? Now, this also will affect what you do, but it starts to give you an organizational picture as well. So what you've really got with command and control is sort of an assumption that you're working in a hierarchical, or what's called, sometimes the pyramid work structure model, and that's what the command and control competencies sort of lend themselves to. Then what you're doing here is when you're going over to the influence and collaboration and focusing more on a network point of view and a matrix point of view, is that you are operating in a role set or network, so which operates differently, and we'll take a look about that in some detail. But let me give you the overview here, is that generally when you're in the command and control or hierarchy environment, you're making decisions and communicating level to level. Very critical, level to level. In other words, something will or won't happen depending on if you make the right contact with the person at the right level in another organization. Whereas if you're in a network environment, you're not functioning level to level in terms of making decisions or communicating. You're functioning point to point. There's you, there's maybe people in manufacturing, engineering, customers, marketing teams, suppliers, vendors, can be other people in the project team. You are working point to point with them in terms of getting the information you need and making the decisions you need to reach the critical milestones and goals that you need to get. So we're going to dive down another level here and say, okay, well, tell me about this. What is this on slide 16? What does this network stuff look like? So if you're used to working in a hierarchy, these like spider wagon wheel diagrams might look a little strange, but most of you that do work in some kind of network, whether you have a visual image like this, in fact, and that's the purpose of this tool, is to create an image that we can do some things with. Whether you have that image or not, in fact, you do work like this. In other words, there's you and there's the people that you reach out to at any given project or any given day. And each person that you work with and each person in a different department, they go into work that morning and they have their role set or their personal network that says there's me and there's the people that I need to contact that day to get done what I need to get done. So this gives you kind of the overall overall model on this. So now we're going to kind of show how this has evolved. So as we go to slide 17 and take a look at this. So this is sort of the then and now. Okay. So in the good old days, all right, before globalization, before customer and systems, before technology fluctuation, there was you. Maybe you were in New York, or you were in Dallas. If you were in Dallas, you had somebody else you worked with. Maybe you had to get on the phone and talk to it in another office in another state, perhaps, but certainly not another geography outside the U.S. And it was your company. It was your company logo, your company culture. It kind of organically grew. And so, yes, you did network, but the complexity of it was not that bad. You could get things done, and even from a time frame, technology, not that much difference, East, West Coast, that sort of thing. So what's happened now, though, on slide 18, is you have an environment that looks a whole lot more like what we're looking at slide 18. So now there's you in your department and someone else in their department and someone else in their department. But maybe you have a team now that some of you are in the U.S., some of you are in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa. Some of you are in Asia. Some of you deal with Central or South America. So you've got these different time zones. You've got these different country cultures, and your decision-making and communicating becomes a whole lot more complex. On top of that, if you've been part of a company that's had a lot of acquisitions, then you've got a ton of corporate cultures. You've had to integrate different people with different ways of doing different business processes, different IT processes, different ways to communicate, different ways that decisions are made, different leadership styles, and this has all made it a whole lot more complex. So at the bottom, I actually have a real example. To go over to the far left, I think most of you have probably heard of the software company Oracle, big database company. Well, in the last anywhere from a year or two to 10 years, they have swallowed up these other very large companies, starting with J.D. Edwards. They bought BEA, PeopleSoft, most of you have heard of, Siebel Systems, and then they recently, so those were all software companies, different cultures as well. Well, now they just bought Sun Microsystems, which is also a hardware company. So now the whole idea of matrix management, how they collaborate, and what their network looks like, is just a whole lot more complex than what it used to be. So if we move on to slide 19, kind of to get to the so what of the personal network. Why do you want to build a personal network and maybe share it with others? And what is that really going to do for you? So the main kind of reasons you want to understand what your network is you want to understand the roles and boundaries between you and somebody else. Who owns this? Who doesn't own this? See, in a matrix environment, it gets very fuzzy. Command and control can be much clearer what the boundaries are, what the handoffs are, what the business processes are. Who's in charge of step A, who's in charge of step B, almost that sort of military model. If you're in a matrix environment, you're going to sit down and define from the beginning who's in what role, what are the boundaries, what are the processes, who's going to be responsible for making what decisions, who's going to be on what communication, and it all needs to be mapped out. And the thing is, we've gone from basically a command and control environment predominantly to more of a network-focused environment, and basically less than in a work generation. So that's been a lot of change, and in a short amount of time. And knowing this allows you to scale and align to the changes that are around you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do an activity. If we go to slide 20, that's going to have a couple parts to it. So let me walk you through this here. So those of you listening out there, and I appreciate, again, you tuning in, I want you to take out a blank piece of paper. And some of you are calling in the conference room, so there may be more of you, more than one of you in one room. So I would take advantage of this. Draw one of these diagrams in the bottom left. So start with the middle. It's a kind of wagon wheel spider diagram, and in the middle is you. You write your name, and then I want you to draw the spokes out from the center. Draw 4, 5, 6, and then write down who are the key people or key teams or key departments that are in your networks. So take a couple of minutes to do that, and while you're doing that, I'm going to this is the first part of the activity here, is so just write that out. I'm going to give you some trainer tips here, and some of you may be able to do this in the room now, or I would suggest you do it later, is I have people draw out what their network is, in other words, who they are and who they think they should be working with, and I have them share it with people on their team so that they know or in their on their project, so they have an understanding of each person is understanding who the other person is working with to get their job done. So as you finish up drawing your own personal network here, we're going to go to slide 21, and I'm going to ask you a question. All right. And what I want you to do is go to your chat box, and you can put in your answer to this, and then I'll pull up a couple of them and comment on them here. So the question is, assuming now that you've drawn your own personal network, the question I put before you is, how can you improve influence and collaboration with each key individual in your network? So take a couple of minutes. Don't think about this. The first thing that comes into your mind is sort of pop it down and type it in the chat box. And we'll take a look at a couple of these as we go here. So again, what are some things that you can do? Because it's just good to share with other people. You may come up with an idea that somebody else hasn't that would be useful to them. So let me see. Okay, I saw one: get to know people at a more human level. Okay, engage in better conversations and discussions, maintain regular communication, understand culture. Again, improve communication. These are all very good. Some other things you can do is understand the other person's role. That's very, very common. Another one too is align on goals. Yes, increase regular reporting, better use of video conferencing. I've got understand your overlaps in your role, build trust and rapport. Okay, these are great. Yeah, know what the standing in the other person's shoes is like. Check your assumptions. Again, review your objectives and align on that. Okay, very good. Yes, again, on developing rapport. So these are all very, very good, and the themes that I see coming up are very good in terms of managing expectations. So a lot around really general the goal alignment, and also as well the communication and understanding the roles, particularly kind of that overlap area of who's in charge of what. So it's again, I'd say it's really good to go back with people on the team, and actually one of the exercises I do is I have people go around a room and I have them share each one and talk through who the person is, what role they have, what role that person has, and what the expectations are of you, the individual, of them and their role, and you do that comparison. The other thing that I can do, so that kind of gets the team aligned. The other thing that I do, and I would kind of suggest this in an environment where you have an experienced facilitator, that may be yourself, because what can happen sometimes is what I call energetic discussions. So what I mean by that is I've done seminars where everybody shares their personal network, and then they put their personal network on a whiteboard or visually represent to the rest of the group, particularly their manager. So this is obviously would be some sort of a team event where there's the group and there's the manager there. Then the manager draws what they think the individual's personal network should look like. So you have your version, and then you have your boss's version of what he or she thinks it should be like. And a lot of times they don't match. And that's where the energetic discussion comes in, because everybody's got this network in their head. And so if you're out executing on different tasks with the individuals in the teams that you think you should be executing with, but your boss, and you never discuss this with your boss, and your boss thinks you're out executing and interacting with a different group of individuals, that difference or that delta can be a point of contention. But what I mean by that is very constructive contention. The groups that I've done this with, as they go through it, are able to get alignment around that, and it makes the workflow and the perception between boss and employee flow much better. So it's really a great alignment activity. So now what we're going to do is, I appreciate you doing that and the input on that one. Excuse me. But as you go to slide 22, we'll kind of get to the summary of where we are at this point. And that's that you can influence, but you cannot compel if you're in a matrix environment. So one of the things we'll look at is, okay, if I'm in that environment here where I have to get things done by influence, how can I be effective in that? So if you go to slide 23, we talked a little bit earlier about the concept in general of making decisions, but what we're going to do here is we're going to go a little bit more specifically. So if you're in a hierarchy environment in a command and control kind of set of competencies, the driving principle on that is maintaining the structure. Probably the best example of this is maybe the military, but the idea is that you are to maintain a command and control structure. Decisions are, as remember before I said, they're level to level. They're made off the idea of position in the organization. A lot of times, still in hierarchical environment. Your task is oriented around your functional structure. And really, we don't call it rank per se, but really your title and that kind of thing. Yeah, supervisor, manager, senior manager, director, senior director. The ranking has quite a bit to do with the influence on this decision. Now, if you're in a network environment, in other words, and where this is useful is if you want to improve your ability to influence over compelling, is that if you explain, in other words, in order to reach your outcomes, that you need to focus on these four things on the bottom. First of all, the driving principle is the request of the customers and the suppliers. Customers who pay your salaries, pay your bills, determine whether you make money or don't make money. Their input determines the driving principle, and also working closely with your suppliers as well. Decisions are usually made either by consensus or most likely at the point of contact. That's where the idea of empowerment comes in. Some of you may not remember, but a while back, if you wanted to get the credits extended on a credit card or for a bank loan, you had to talk to a supervisor or manager or literally go visit them at the brick and mortar's bank. Now you call someone on the phone who may be an hourly worker. They are empowered to make a decision at the point of contact to raise or not raise your credit. So the decision criteria to make critical decisions has been pushed down into organizations and out through these networks. So the task is really not around the function. The task is who has the information to get that decision made that will fulfill the customer and the supplier's needs. And then finally, the relationship isn't around rank, it's around influence. It's who can influence another individual, another organization to get me from point A to point B. I don't really care what the title is, what the rank is, I just want to get it done. So that's what the organizational structure looks like. And if you get a handle on understanding that, your ability to influence the organization and the network will improve. Now on slide 24, and what I mentioned very early on is that we have a model with a set of competencies around command and control and balancing that with influence and collaboration. But once you have a core set of competencies, there's some concrete activities that you need to be able to do in order to be effective in a collaborative environment and an effective matrix manager. And we're going to talk about those in a couple of seconds. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about the stress you can go through as you're transitioning from one role to the other as you make your way to those capabilities. So on slide 25, and some of you, I guarantee some of you have experienced this before, is if you have someone, and this could be yourself, who's worked through a command and control environment, and is used to operating from how much they know, if they're correct, what their self-perception is, and how they want other people to perceive them, particularly if they spend, to kind of get down here and talk about, kind of the elephants in the room here. If somebody's really focused on managing up and not managing down, and concerned about what they look like to the people above them, and then also if they're really focused on keeping tabs on you and regulating the environment around them, as they move towards empowerment, as they move towards risk-taking and participation in development, there's going to be some behaviors that I guarantee most of you and all of you have seen one or the other here. So first of all, if you have somebody that, and this will come up in the assessment somewhat, if you have someone that's really focused on how much they know and that's critical to them, then they, when they reach their stress or what's called the pinch point, they will turn into a control freak, and they will want to control things. So that's an indication that that is a competency that they need to learn to be more flexible about. The next thing here is somebody who comes up and who's terribly risk averse. In other words, they're concerned about being right all the time, so they have a fear of mistakes. And these are the people that you come up and say, well, they won't make the big decisions. So they won't really move on this. And that's because there's a risk aversion there that has to do with a comfort around correctness and a discomfort with moving towards a risk-taking. The other thing, too, is, you get to this thing where if somebody is really concerned about their self-perception and things kind of go wrong somewhere, they will tend to point the finger at other people. And of course, this never happens, and we never see this. Obviously, you know, a bit of a joke here because it's in the press every day. You know, you have stuff where people are always, organizations, companies, always trying to avoid pointing the finger at somebody else. So that shows a difficulty in the transition to participation. And then finally, this last one, what you see is if the person wants to keep tabs on people and is nervous about whether people do rather than focusing on their development. That's where you get into what's called a lot of times it's heroic behavior. So they will behave heroically and kind of swoop in at the last minute to save the day. And I can't tell you, I won't mention any companies or any names, but I've worked in consulting for a number of years, and I cannot tell you how many partners have swooped in at the last minute to take over control of a project from somebody underneath them to make sure that it went right in their own eyes. So these are very typical stress points that will take place here. So with that in mind, how can you achieve this balance here? And if we move on to slide 26, this isn't going to answer your whole problem, but this gives you an idea here. And the way that I put this is kind of in a coaching. My point of view on this is in a coaching environment. If I'm working with people that I need to be effective matrix managers, and they come from a command and control environment, there's a number of things that I ask them about that, enabling them in their transition. And one of them around empowerment is, you know, what do you need to have happen in order to feel listened to, in order to get a sense that people are connected to you, start that empowerment process and connection and communication. Another thing with the correctness and risk-taking here is I want to know what that individual's personal wall or that personal limitation is for them. In other words, you know, where is that comfort zone end for them, and so that I can understand that, and then enable them and work with them to move past that, so that they're better in an environment of ambiguity and uncertainty. Then on participation, that works pretty well if you set out a set of mutually beneficial outcomes or joint set of priorities. In other words, if you have individuals that are working towards a common goal that's aligned, then that just makes the participation process go a lot easier, and people tend to get involved in that fairly easily. And the last one is in terms of development. I always like to know, like, what gets them excited, what's their personal driver, and work from a motivational point of view of that's where I start. If I understand the top thing for them that gets them up in the morning and get them excited about coming to work, working on a project, then that's what I want to find out and move from there. So that's a little bit, I mean, there's a lot more to this, but hopefully it'll give you some ideas in terms of moving to the right direction here and balancing the competencies out. So as we move towards a summary here on slide 27, as I said, there's the competencies and being effective in each one of those areas, but then there's a set of activities that is absolutely necessary if you're going to work in a collaborative environment, be an effective matrix manager, and deal with kind of changes and fluctuations that's out in the business environment for you. So the first thing is planning for change. You really need to be a change agent, but you really need to understand the change management process. And some of you I know I'm sure are very familiar with that. And the thing about the caveat on this is these are not necessarily things you need to be able to do yourself, but you either need to be able to have these capabilities on your team, or you need to be able to hire or get consultants or whatever, but you need to be present somewhere. So change management would be one. The other thing is you really need to understand the business processes, because business processes cut across organizations. They cut across the hierarchy, across the pyramid. So you need to understand how they work, where any issues are, and then how to effectively change the business processes so that they can enable whatever project you're on to work correctly. The other thing, too, is you really need to have an ability to facilitate choice. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be an effective facilitator yourself, but you need to have an environment where input and choice and different alternatives is a part of the working environment. The next thing is that it's, as I talked about, is alignment on goals, priorities, and mutual benefit, but you need to be able to have effective negotiation capabilities or skills in order to be able to do that. And again, obviously it works well if you have it, but if you need to have access to somebody that knows how to negotiate for different benefits, particularly to align on goals and get people that maybe for a long time were not used to working together, sharing information, to get focused on some common mutual ground as going forward. Then, obviously, an environment of continuous learning and improvement, whether it's from a strict kind of manufacturing quality point of view or in services as well, SLA agreements, that sort of thing. But improvement and learning, you can't stay still, you can't stay put, you've got to keep moving. And finally, joint problem solving, where you're constantly looking at one or more sets of groups, because that's the nature of a matrix environment, in terms of having one or more groups participate in the problem solving around what goals you need to achieve. So those capabilities, as I said, are extremely critical going forward here. So just before we have the Q&A session, I think we're about at around quarter up here. If we move on to slide 28, as we get some questions in here. Here is an action planning, just an exercise I have called, a lot of you might have used it, familiar in training facilitation, called start, stop, and continue. So what I'd ask you is this: is it relative to balancing your command and control and influence collaboration skills, and perhaps improving your influence and collaboration competencies and building additional capabilities, is three things. What do you want to start doing that you're not doing? What do you want to stop doing that you don't think you're effective on? And then the last one is, if there's areas where you feel that you're very effective, those are areas that you want to continue. So this is just for you, the worksheet, to go away and plan some actions around this topic. Again, what you're going to start doing, you're not doing, what you're going to stop doing, that maybe you want to stop, or other people, if you get feedback from them, want you to stop, and those things that you want to continue. So with that, Sarah, I will turn it back to you. And again, I want to thank everybody for listening for today and for your participation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. We have some questions that have already come in, so I'm going to go ahead and launch right into the Q&A. But feel free, go ahead and send us in your questions, and we'll answer as many as we can get to today. Any that we don't get to answer today, Jim will respond to you directly with an email response, and that'll actually get out to everyone, so that you not only can see all of the questions, but then you can see the responses as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first question here is from Kim, and Kim asks, what are some best practices for virtual teams?
Some best practices for virtual teams. Okay, so there's a number of them, but there's a few that I keep in mind. One of them is, and these are kind of remedial. So one of the best practices is that you set aside a time that works for everybody. So that's the first thing. Like particularly if you're here and you're dealing with Asia, where like early in the morning for us is, early in the morning for us is later, or vice versa. What you need to do is actually, and the thing with the virtual teams is pre-planning is key for all the things I'm going to tell you. So one is you find out in terms of communication, either it's on the phone or you're going to have video conference or whatever, what time works best for them. So connected to that is you need to understand the country and the corporate culture in terms of some countries, they start earlier or later than we do. So like I deal with Singapore a lot, and they tend to, collectively the whole country, take the kids into school. So a lot of times what we do is we start later than we normally would here. So, and in some countries being up, so actually having them on the phone late at night, that wouldn't work for us. It works for them pretty well. So those are things that you have to plan out. There can also be a corporate influence on that. So another thing connected to that, kind of a third thing, is you need to share the pain. So I've worked with companies that they kind of, the corporate office sort of dictates the time when meetings are, and they never change that. And what I've done is I've gone in and said, no. Sometimes you can't have that 2 in the afternoon meeting. You've got to have the 7 o'clock night meeting or the 5 a.m. in the morning meeting as well. And rotate that around so that everybody, it's not a burden all the time for one particular group of people. And then finally, this one, you may not think about this, but whenever I'm going to do any remote meeting at all, even if it's a regular one, get in and pre-test the technology, make sure it works, because a lot of times it won't. And that's video links, links to presentations, webinars like this, everything. You really can't assume that you're going to come in 5 minutes before and the conference line is going to work. So those are just a few.
Great, thank you. Our next question here is from Betty. Jim, you talked about how to have people discover their personal wall. Can you talk a little bit more around kind of maybe some questions that you may ask or some things that you might do to help them guide through that?
Yeah, I'm pretty straightforward on that. I tend to ask people just pretty directly, like, what gets you excited? What gets you up in the morning? If you could come into work and do anything, what would it be? What would be that thing where the alarm goes off and it's like, oh my God, I have to do this again? It's like, oh, the alarm, you wake up before the alarm because you can't wait to get in there. And it kind of tends to be aspirational, but I tend to go that way because that shows the kind of the outer edge of the wall of where I need to go, and then sometimes, depending on what the answer, I'll back in and try to gauge something a little more realistic. And then sometimes I'll also turn it around and ask them what keeps them up at night. In other words, what's the real stress thing? Because sometimes, people don't want to do stuff because of the stress, and not, in other words, they are doing stuff they really like to do, but there's other stress stuff in there that's kind of interfering with that. So I like to know both. And I'm pretty direct about it. And you know what? I find out people really like to be asked that.
Good, thank you. Our next question here is from Mary. And Mary asks, how do you motivate individuals who may be pulled between 2 or more bosses?
Okay, really good question, because at the end of the day, there's a boss that signs your paycheck, and there's a boss that, and that may be the boss actually you don't work for a lot, but there's another boss that you have relative to different projects that you have. And so, first of all, there's a couple of steps here. One is that you need to have your bosses aligned. In other words, you need to have a mutual understanding of what each boss thinks you're accountable for, and you need to map this. If I were going to come in and do this, the way I do it is I'd have you draw out what you think you're accountable for to each boss. That would be step 1. I would share that with them so that you could see how aligned you are on that. And then the next conversation I'd have is there a set of mutual benefits or mutual goals in which each boss would be, maybe excited is the wrong word, but you understand what I'm saying. Each boss would be happy and excited in terms of, if you fulfill this goal for your boss that signed your paycheck, what we call your direct line, solid line boss, and then what you're doing on the project for what's a lot of times called your dotted line boss also has an interest in there as well. So if they can come to some conclusion about mutually beneficial goals, that also helps. So really, clarity and alignment, and then mutual goals.
Thank you. And Jim, it looks like we have an NLP user on the line here. Vincent asks, how would you incorporate neurolinguistic programming with this Matrix Manager process?
Good question, and thanks for the question on the NLP. What I do when I do the personal networks, and this is if I have optimum environment, I want to look at the relationships and the idea of who works with whom, but then sort of going the next level down, I like to look at individual and personal style and learning style, thinking style, that sort of thing. So if I were to do a team building and have people build out and understand their personal networks, I'd want to use NLP or the NCP or something to then have people assess what their individual decision-making and thinking and communication styles are, and also share that as well, because that just adds a whole other level of rapport as people have to interact with each other in projects. So again, in the network, focus down on the individual level and understand the thinking and communication style.
Great. And our last question for today, go ahead and continue to send your questions in, and Jim will respond to those after the session. Our last question for you, Jim, here is from John. And John asks, what's the difference between the old way of management and then this new matrix management?
Well, the old way kind of that's in the literature, which I think is good, is still a good thing to study, like the project management book of knowledge and things like that. I still think that there's nothing wrong in there. It's very effective. What you have now in what's changed is a little. It's kind of subtle, but it's in. Before, what you had is you had an environment where here's the hierarchy, and I'm carving out a project, a designated project with a project manager. I may have a PMO, a project management office, decision criteria on that. These people are going to be responsible, let's say, for implementing some sort of software. And again, it's a project team. It's cross-functional. It's matrix, but it's a very well-defined, intact group of people. So what's different now is that you are doing matrix and project work and collaborative work all the time, back and forth, different projects, very fluid. Your role may change. You may go from command and control to collaboration several times a day, because your project team is not this well-defined, impact project kind of over here that has a set beginning and end. Your work environment is just, and I tell people this all the time, is we all live now in a combination of functional and project organizations, and that's never going to change, ever. Again, I don't think. It implies that you have to be very fluid about your matrix role. So it's really a scaling and really one of degree over what was before.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. If we did not get to answer your question, you will receive an emailed response directly. Feel free to contact us with any additional questions or feedback on today's webinar. Today's presentation is the foundation of the Matrix Manager Inventory. You use this assessment in your organization to achieve the results that Jim talked about today. You can review the Facilitator set for 30 days. It's risk-free. It's only $49, and it's a huge savings. It's regularly priced at $134. The set does include the trainer's instructions, the PowerPoint presentation for an hour of classroom session, and a preview of the assessment both in paper and in online format. There's also developmental background information as well. Don't forget to use the coupon code. It's MMWebinar, and that's good until January 31st. Thank you very much, and we appreciate your time and hope you found today's webinar informative.